Could there have been diabolical plans hatched a long time ago to entrap and enslave man and womankind once and for all? Have we been warned and behind the scenes moves made to secure ancient old laws to govern humanity during dark times, which seems to be entering our reality as of late? What are the Noahide laws? If you have read them, they sound like a reasonable way for humanity to live, especially if we lack ethical understanding or even intuitive guidance. At least that's what it looks like on the surface. And would the executioner of these laws perhaps be subjected to the same laws as the ones they were written for? Someone has to enforce and oversee them, right? Someone or a group has to be in charge. Interesting enough, the Noahide laws have been adopted and even ran through legislative bodies around the world, which most would be surprised to know is true. Why are they being adopted in these countries and organizations, including the United States, as humanity's new normal way of living? You would think for this fact alone, everyone should have read these potential laws and guidelines by now. Did you know of this? Well, that's exactly what we'll be doing as we discuss what is the Noahide laws and who will be enforcing them, and how will they be implemented throughout the world. And under the right circumstances, could a dark agenda be behind these laws? You will find out as we interview Stephen and Yana Ben-Nun from Israeli News Live on the true agenda of the Noahide laws and the latest on what is happening with Israel and Palestine's conflict as it accelerates into a probable dark reality that may trigger an ancient and barbaric way of life for everyone here on Earth. It's time for eyes wide open and to start connecting the dots, because if we don't start creating our own reality, and it looks like there's a plan in place to start creating our reality for us. Welcome to Frequency Wars.
The time to defy the modern agenda is now. UI Media Network presents Frequency Wars, an explosive new series that examines contentious subject matter pursuing us beyond our five senses. This weekly series discovers the intricacies of imposing issues that challenge our daily existence and question humanity. Provocative and intriguing, we confront the issues and conflicts affecting us on a global scale and beyond. The commentary and guests will shift the paradigm and defy the status quo. What will you believe? Welcome to Frequency Wars, the next revolution. And here's your host, challenging you to question everything, Tim Ray.
I'm Tim Ray, and welcome to Frequency Wars. We will be discussing in depth the Noahide laws with our special guest shortly, but right now, let me list what are the 7 main laws. Although there are tens of more sub-laws, texts, but for the time's sake, let's just focus on the 7. Let's take a look. Do not profane God's oneness in any way. Number 2, do not curse your creator. Number 3, do not murder. Number 4, do not eat a limb of a living animal. Number 5, do not steal. Number 6, harness and channel the human libido. And number 7, establish courts of law and ensure justice in our world. Well, it sounds like some reasonable and positive principles to live by, even if you're not brought up in a religion that believes that these were Noah's 7 commandments for all humans to live by. But what I find so fascinating is some of the words and meanings used in the Noahide laws I have seen before in other similar writings, such as Agenda 2130 Sustainable Development, UN 17 goals, if you remember. We shared them on our past shows a while ago. Let's start out with the law of do not eat a limb of the living animal. Respect all life, God's creatures as intelligent beings. We have duty not to cause pain to other creatures. Now, comparing this law to Goal 14 and 15 of the UN Agenda 2130, life below water and life on land. For open oceans and deep seas arise, sustainable can be achieved only through increased international cooperation to protect vulnerable habitats. We must be respectful towards wildlife and only take part in ecotourism opportunities that are responsibly and ethically run in order to prevent wildlife disturbances. Interesting, how similar, huh? How about the Goal 16 of the UN Plan of Peace and Justice, Strong Institutions? Promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to the justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. And now let's compare this to the Noahide law to establish courts and law and ensure justice in our world. World justice, how interesting. And one last one I thought we would most likely be interested in sharing is the UN Goal 3, good health and well-being. You can start by promoting and protecting your own health and the health of those around you by making well-informed choices, practicing safe sex, and vaccinating your children. We have the NOACHIDE law that states harness and channel the human libido. Could that be an old-style way of saying safe sex and make informed choices? Although vaccinating your children, the UN really, with all that we know, I would have to question that the UN's intentions for Bill Gates is clear about this depopulation program and the use of vaccines being one of his solutions, as he stated on TED Talks not too long ago. Is this all a coincidence? The similarities of many of the NOACHIDE laws and the UN Agenda 2130 that we find ourselves in today? Or could this be the same people be involved in getting the NOACHIDE laws as preferred religion throughout the world governments and organizations, which will have influenced the UN and Sustainable Development Goals? If so, then it was very cleverly done and quietly accomplished, incorporating the ancient laws within the UN plans for the world for sustainable development. Clever, but is it wise? And wise for all of humanity? Well, let's find out. We will be speaking with one of the hosts of Israeli News Live to discuss just that, and also what is going on with the Israeli-Palestine conflict and what's happening not only today, but how is this moving the New World Order agenda and the UN goals closer to reality. Stephen, welcome back to Frequency Wars.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back with you guys, Tim.
I'm going to play a clip for you first, Stephen, and this is a moment, I believe it's Rabbi Cohen at the UN talking about how he's wanting to get the NOACHIDE laws adopted adopted in the UN. So let me play this clip for a minute, and then let's discuss a little bit about what's going on with the NOACHIDE laws and it being actually implemented in the UN.
My intention as founder and director of Universal NOACHIDE Code is to call all 193 UN members states that comprise this organization to incorporate in their constitutions the Universal NOACHIDE Code. That the Universal NOACHIDE Ethics Day in the UN and a resolution on this, which we'll give you a copy to hand out and to review, and be passed to promote the responsibility for human beings, first of all, to their creator, and from which this code originates, and then to his fellow human being. The Universal NOACHIDE Code encompasses the principles of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2030 agenda. The Universal NOACHIDE Code, or UNC, is above all politics, justice, and religious systems and boundaries. It is part of all political, judicial, and religious systems because it transcends from that which is man-made. All different laws are man-made. This is godly, and it's a way that God gave us for us to live amongst the 70 nations that we don't all think alike, to all live in coexistence and harmony and peace. Israel belongs to the Jewish people because it says in the Bible, not because the UN made a declaration.
All right, so Stephen, you just heard the clip there. So before we get an update on what's going on in Israel and Palestine, is it just a coincidence that the UN Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals, are somewhat in line with the NOACHIDE laws? And of course, NOACHIDE laws being in the past and the UN goals being more in the recent future, or recent time, present time.
It's definitely not unusual at all. In fact, the problem is this is what's been steering everything from the background. The Jewish people, the Israelites, especially the Orthodox Jews in the Chabad organization, they have planned these things centuries in advance. If you go back to the Gaon of Vilna, which is a 17th century sage, they're following his writings almost to the T. And of course, then you get Rambam, who is the 11th century sage that wrote the NOACHIDE laws in the first place. But everything is moving forward for a new world order. And of course, the Noahide laws would be those laws that would be incumbent upon the Gentile people or the rest of the people that are not Jewish of the world. And they work on getting in every aspect of government and social life, etc., in order to control the narrative, and it's done on a global scale. So it's nothing unusual.
So, so is it because the UN leaders of the UN, or just they are adopting the Noahide laws because they're intimidated, they're forced to, or they think it's a good idea? I mean, do you know how it's being done, or how it was done?
Well, to say exactly how it is done, I can't say all the specifics on that, but I can tell you that it is, and this is from my experience of being part of the Chabad organization for 20 years, and just in friendship with other rabbis, knowing how that the organization has planned these things, it's more through infiltration is the way this has been done. The Orthodox community has always known that the only way that they're going to control things is to infiltrate all the different organizations, whether it be the UN, the banks, whether it be religious groups, and that includes the Vatican, charismatic groups, Baptist groups. They infiltrate all these organizations and they work their way up into leadership, even if it means pretending that you're a Christian when you're really an Orthodox Jew in doing so. But especially in government entities, as we've seen in our own government here in the United States, ADL controls everything that goes on within, whether it be the Congress or the Senate. Everyone is bought out, and that's how they've managed to pull this off.
Well, yeah, it seems like, God, you know, the old saying, when you first practice to deceive, right, the tangled web you weave. It's, I guess that it's a lot of the folks who do that, who change their name or they act that certain way, and to deceive. Are they not feeling conscientious about it, lying and doing things that even the Noahide law says you shouldn't be doing, I would assume?
Well, it goes back to the Frankist Sabbatean doctrine that was born out of Turkey through one of the rabbis that more than 50% of Judaism believed was the Messiah back in his day. And if it means to bring about evil, to bring about good, or to bring about the coming of the Messiah, they're willing to do it. And so for Judaism to lie, to deceive, etc., if the end game helps to bring the Messiah, they believe that that's perfectly okay and justified in doing so. And that's why they do the acts that they do.
And we'll talk a little bit more about separation in church here in a second. I want to show you another video. But just to your point, because what confuses me is the Noahide laws in Judaism proclaims that they're to be a higher level of living, a higher purpose, more ethical, everything else. But yet they're rationalizing to deceive, to get the end justifies the means, or is that just a rationalization, or is that actually part of the doctrine?
Well, that is really part of the doctrine, because you have to remember in Judaism, especially Orthodox rabbis, the Bible, whether it be God, whether it be Noah, not Noah, but in the case of Moses, who is considered to be the greatest prophet of all times, even God himself is subordinate to the rabbis themselves. This is an actual fundamental belief in Judaism, and they actually cite a scripture within the Old Testament proving their point, which really doesn't prove anything. But they believe that the power that God had himself and even that of Moses was delegated down to the rabbis. And so therefore they can add and make laws, change laws, or do whatever they want to with the laws. And therefore, whatever they say is what will go. And their way of bringing about the Messiah is going to be the way they believe it should be. And whatever means they need to do that in order to get global dominance and to facilitate that the world will be ruled from Jerusalem and the Messiah will sit there, they're going to carry out those acts in order to bring that about. And that includes all of the wars that we see happening in the world.
Wow. I would just for as a human nature, you'd think that would catch up to you eventually, at least to your conscience. But let me switch here. I want to play another video for you real quick. Of course, I believe it's also Rabbi Cohen talking about, he gets a question about how does the Noahide laws deal with being rolled out in all these other countries, especially some countries that are atheists, they don't believe in a higher power. How are they going to justify the Noahide laws there? So let's play the clip and then we'll talk about it.
My name is Daniel. I'm from Norway. For many years, we've been a Christian country. We had a state church, but we removed this because of the growth of atheists. So the NOACHIDE code, the first rule is do not deny God. Then how can you expect countries such as Norway to implement this rule if you have a growing population that do not believe in it?
Okay, very good question. In America, there was this challenge because of the separation of church and state, meaning that the government cannot, it's freedom of religion, and the government cannot impose any religion on any people. The American government had that issue between church and state, and they overcame it by saying it's education. The point is that they overcame it in America by having it promoted as education and so on. It doesn't have to say it's respect God. It doesn't have to say you have to pray to in a church or in it says respect the higher authority. But I think if they overcame that issue in America with church and state, I think the same issue could be overcome in Norway.
So here you hear him talking about using education as a way to get the understanding of the separation of church and state. Is that simple? Is that all that really matters for the what they all NOACHIDE laws want is just a way to share it, or do they care that it's it's not going to be just going to be an education piece? It's not going to really be the spiritual understanding of the law.
Well, even in the man that was there at the meeting that was asking the question, speaking about Norway, the fundamental fact that he's trying to bring out is that you can only have one God. And he's looking at his country as being a Christian nation like the United States. And I thought it was kind of interesting because this Rabbi Cohen actually diverts really the question. He's dodging the question of what's really being asked, because he wants to know, with it being that, okay, there's only one God, he's looking at his nation being more of maybe perhaps Trinitarian beliefs or Trinitarian values, because they believe that Jesus Christ, being the Son of God, as the scripture says, he didn't think it was robbery to be equal with God. And this goes in total contrast to, or it's contrary to that of the 7 NOACHIDE laws. So he's wondering, how are they going to overcome this then? If knowing that this is really the case, how do you do that? Well, he deflects and he goes to the United States and he says, we were able to get this passed by doing this through education. And truly, that's exactly how they do it. They do it under an education law there. But the problem is that they were successful in America. And although they consider, some have actually called this, well, it's no different than National Ice Cream Day. That's not true. It still is on the law books. And eventually it will become something that becomes enforced, especially if they manage to do away with the Constitution and we go under a one world government, which is the end game in the first place. And then regardless of where they put the law, under education or whatever, it will then be implemented in a far more harsher way, which will be carrying out the sub-laws that are under the 7 NOACHIDE laws.
Well, interesting. It's like you said, it's a matter of just getting it on the books. Do whatever you need to do to get on the books, because at the right time, in the right circumstances, it'll be a matter of enforcement, and you can manipulate that process. I mean, very clever, cleverly done. So let's switch here to what's going on in Israel right now in the Palestinian conflict, because it apparently seems to be accelerating, off and on. But I'm going to ask you a two-part question here. Can you explain to me, or explain to our viewers, what is Israel's formal public goal with Palestine? And then we'll get into what their informal private goal is.
Well, the former goal really kind of sums it up when Israel actually announced that they are a Jewish state not too long ago, and they made that an official law. And so even formerly, they are pretty much pushing the Palestinians out completely and letting the world know that they are a Jewish state, not even an Israelite state, not a 12 tribes nation state. When they say they're a Jewish state, they're limiting that to the house of Judah, and they believe that they are the descendants of the house of Judah that have returned home. That being said, what's interesting in that formal declaration is it's going to push the Palestinians completely out and even eventually out of the politics itself. That's pretty much the formal side of this, as they prepared a one world government. I know that we hear a lot of the New World Order speak that's done all over the internet. Officially, the United States government, those that I work with that I've known for some time, they call it a one world or a global government that we are headed to. So they know that very well. But unofficially, it's going to be, Palestinians are going to be moved off as much as they possibly can, and they're going to lose more and more rights, and Israel will become a dictatorship, not just, I mean, very much like South Africa was at one time, where they set out South Africa was an apartheid state. Israel is already an apartheid state in action and in deeds of what they're doing. But once they can get that full dominance, it's going to be horrendous what will happen to the Palestinians at that point.
So, I mean, are they going to leave them where they are, or relocate them, or just manage to control them at, like you said, in horrific ways? Is that the end game, just to get them out of there and bring that land in for the rest of Israel?
Well, look at what started the whole confrontation just recently. Of course, we had the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They go in there, they begin to attack the worshipers in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. But also they went in and they evicted families out of their homes, taken over their homes without any notification whatsoever to the families. That's even beyond what Israel has done in the past. Normally they give them some sort of a notification when they're going to confiscate their properties and lands. They're not even doing this now. In fact, the one man that I worked with in D.C. was part of the team that was negotiating the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas just recently, and the Egyptians. He was there in Israel at the time. And a man that has always been very pro-Israel actually tells me that Israel was completely in the wrong in what they did at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and as well as evicting these Palestinians from their homes without any prior notification. He said they have instigated this war from the very outset, and actually Israel is to blame for it. That floored me coming from him, because I know how much he's always loved Israel, but now he's concerned that Netanyahu has gone down a very evil path, and that at one time he thought he had Israel, their good in mind, but he sees that he's going down a very evil path, and which goes really back to another issue, because when the whole conflict began, I noticed that things were just spiraling out of control. Very unusual for Netanyahu not to step in and try to bring order back when the rockets are raining down. And so I had reached out to my own counterpart and asked, what's going on in Israel? This doesn't seem normal. And he wrote me back, and his words were very perspective, L4 plus setting the stage, and the shell game is activated. Now, what he means by L4 plus, which is level 4, level 5 entities that control the government of the United States, this is Soros and Kissinger, and they were setting the stage, basically creating the unrest in order to get the shell game activated, which ultimately is going to bring about complete conflict in the region, setting the stage for a global war that will take place in the year 2024, unless they decide to move that up.
And I'm sure Iran will be in the middle of that as well, and doing their part for this chaos.
Iran is working with the United States and with Israel. They know their part in this, and this is what a lot of people are not aware of. I know this from my own circle of intel that I work with. Rouhani, he is a Freemason. He works with the West. And the only thing that they have feared, and this is including Israel, is that Iran, because they're so anxious to do their part in attacking Israel, is that they will jump the gun and launch a nuclear strike on Tel Aviv prematurely. Wow. But they do know that that's supposed to happen. Iran knows that's their part in this. And those elite inside the government of Israel know full well that Iran is going to do this. And Israel is going to retaliate, not against Iran directly, but against Damascus. That's where they will retaliate. And they will say that fulfills biblical scripture.
Well, interesting, because same thing like with Hamas and Israel. Seems like they're all working for the same, they're all playing their game together. And, and people, the people in society think that they hate each other. whether they like or not, but they're actually playing that game of war with each other for other alternatives, right?
That's exactly right. Hamas was created by the Israeli government, and they were created by the Israeli government to bring attacks against Israel, and then Israel retaliates as what they call their justified means. In fact, there was a general, a former Israeli general, not general, but defense minister, Lieberman, who just recently came out. It was published in Israeli news post. I think Jerusalem Post carried the article, and he was saying that within a few days, Netanyahu is going to award Hamas another $30 million, basically insinuating that Netanyahu is going to finance more missiles to come rain down on Israel.
Yeah. Problem, reaction, solution, right, Stephen? Right. Problem, reaction, solution. We're going to out a little time here, but let me squeeze in this other question as well. This is, I think, a challenging question, but hopefully you'll be able to jump in there. Is from a biblical perspective, what is supposed to happen with Palestine in reference to the Old Testament, Palestine and Israel conflict to the Old Testament, and what is supposed to happen to Palestine and Israel with the New Testament?
Here's the thing. A lot of people that'll probably be listening, Tim, they believe that Israel coming home to the land in 1948 is fulfillment of biblical scripture. They believe that this is something that was supposed to happen, and that all 12 tribes will eventually come back. And of course, they're looking at this as being that the law will go from Jerusalem. This is nothing further from the truth. This was actually, and I go into this in a lot of the teachings that I do as well, and I didn't believe it either for a long time. I was very much pro the 1948 narrative myself. But Israel, a lot of this was fulfilled back in the times of Christ. The easiest one to see is Acts chapter 2, verse 36, where Peter says, "O you house of Israel, this same Jesus whom you have crucified is both Lord and Christ." So he puts all 12 tribes in Israel 2,000 years ago. That's the short of that there. So Israel, really, what we see today is a Rothschild creation that is trying to mimic what Jesus fulfilled and the apostles fulfilled, the believers did 2,000 years ago. And so they're setting this up for the Antichrist rule. So what do we see? We see that, yes, there was going to be a creation of the state of Israel. It would be a biblical part because of the Antichrist himself coming to try to reign and rule from Jerusalem. And that what is going to happen New Testament-wise is we're going to see the Gog of Magog war. Most Christians believe the Gog of Magog war is all the world's nations coming against Israel and attacking Israel and God intervening on their behalf. In a way, there's some truth to that, but that's not exactly right. The Gog of Magog war is basically this Pharisaic group of rabbis that had overthrown the Zadokite priesthood 2,000 years ago. They come back. That is where your Gog is. Gog is actually the Antichrist figure, because what we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls that you do not have in the Bible itself, when we read about Gog of Magog, is that Gog is called the Prince of Rosh, or the Prince of the head of Meshach. So what we have is a prince or an Antichrist rising. He is the Rosh, which corresponds, and I'm fixing to do a teaching on this. It's never been done before anywhere on the internet that I'm aware of, but that will coincide with the deadly wound that was healed of Revelation chapter 13, that head that raises up the beast kingdom. And that is actually being done internally, and they're coming against Israel per se, but this part of Israel are the Christians. This was the Palestinian believers that have been in the land for the last 2,000 years since Jesus was here, that the Romans allowed them to live there, to be farmers, to supply the Romans with what they have need of. That's why there's been a Christian presence in Israel that were basically Jews all along. In fact, 50% of Palestinians know that they were crypto-Jews. They are from the house of Judah from 2,000 years ago. And of course, the same thing, they will come against Damascus and all the other believers that were actually all Jewish descent. So yeah, Israel all 12 tribes that became believers over that time period and through the 2,000 years. Gog of Magog is coming down with all of his armies from all the different nations of the world that they comprised of, and they are attacking the believers that believed in Jesus Christ to start with. Wow. That's where we're at. That's where we're headed.
Wow. I mean, boy, it sure gets heavy and many facets to what's going on, and you really have to be a biblical scholar such as yourself to keep track of what's being said. But it does help. I assume it helps you, Stephen, on kind of predicting what perhaps will be the next step. A forever chess game there, too. So one last thing I should say, one last question here. We're going to be talking about the Georgia Guidestones here in Georgia, where I live, Alberta, Georgia. And do you see any similarities between, because I do, but I'm curious if you do, between the Georgia Guidestones and the Noahide laws?
Yeah, there's quite a few of those in there, especially like, for example, in number 6, let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. Notice it's a world court. I believe that's actually the 6th law in the Noahide laws, that they're to establish the rule, the court, the rule of law that is to go on.
Right.
Then the first one, maintain humanity under 500 million in a perpetual balance with nature.
Yeah.
Now, we might look at that and say, well, no, there's nothing in the Noahide laws that says that. But if you take into account that there's decapitation for the violation of every one of those laws, and that includes Christians that believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that's decapitation. The homosexual people, and I'm not here to speak against them per se on what they choose to do. I'm just simply saying, if you're homosexual, that's a violation of the sexual laws. You're going to be decapitated. And the mere fact that I happen to know the very company that ordered all the parts for the guillotines here in the United States, with over 1 million guillotine blades that were ordered, tells me that, and of course it was told to me, that these guillotines are being ordered to carry out the Noahide laws and what the punishments will be in the future.
Well, that's
a lot of these laws are very interesting to say.
Sure, it's very disturbing to hear that too. Well, listen, Stephen, I want to thank you for coming in and joining us and sharing this incredible information. So much more to follow up on, and this is going to be an ongoing conflict and ongoing content that we'll be able to share and with you too. And thank you for being so courageous for speaking your truth and being here for humanity during these dark times that looks like we're going into. I know you're going to join us a little bit later on with your wife, Yana, and talk a little bit more about Noahide laws and more about the guillotines and what's going to be happening, potentially happening if this does get through and moves forward. So thank you, Stephen, for joining us.
Thank you, Tim, for having us on. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. You just heard Stephen matching